Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Uh, let's get started. My name is Van Burbach. For those of you who don't know me, I am an environmental geologist, and I'm currently employed by the Lobella Associates in their Waste and Recycling Division. So I have been spending the last 15 years of my life working in environmental consulting, particularly for the waste industry and for particularly for uh, local governments, trying to advise them on waste and recycling issues. And this is a big part of what I've done. Just a little bit of my background. I have a bachelor's degree in geology from Hope College in Holland, Michigan. I have a master's and PhD in geophysics from the University of Texas at Austin. I've been working as an environmental consultant for the last 26 years or so. As I said, the last 14 or so years, I've been working exclusively in the solid waste industry as an environmental consultant. So I've spent a lot of time in landfills and in other locations, looking at the issues that all of the waste that we produce as a society are creating. So today I want to focus on how you and I can be the solution to some of the issues that we face in our society today. And particularly, I want to focus on one particular issue, and that is the issue of single-use plastics. This is a huge problem in the waste industry. The amount of plastic waste that is being generated is just skyrocketing over the last couple of decades. Globally, we are now generating over 300 million tons of plastic waste. 300 million tons of waste every year. And that includes, just in the United States alone, we're creating 2.4 million tons of PET plastics. Most of this is plastic water bottles. Every year, we as Americans use over 102 billion plastic bags that just end up in the environment or in our landfills. This is a huge issue that is becoming, it's really becoming an epidemic almost in the world today. According to the EPA, only 9.1% of plastic materials generated in the United States was recycled. This data comes from 2015. Okay. It's actually less than that today, and I'll get into that a little bit later as to why that is. But that's only 9% of the plastic waste that we generate is being recycled. That's huge. So recycling is not putting a huge dent in the issue. The real problem is how much waste we're producing in the first place. Another couple of things just to point out, as most of you probably know, plastic doesn't really degrade. It's estimated that a piece of plastic in a landfill will last 500 to 1,000 years before it decomposes. And really, out in the environment, plastics never actually go away. They just break down into smaller and smaller pieces. But they're still there. They're still plastic, and they still affect our environment. And this is, I think, probably one of the biggest concerns, is that so much of this plastic waste eventually ends up in our oceans. Almost 8 million metric tons of plastic is entering our oceans every year, and that's ridiculous. This graph just kind of shows how much plastic waste we're generating as a society. This is the global amount of plastics that is actually going into our waste system. As you see, back in the 1960s, plastic was still a relatively new thing, and we weren't really generating that much. But today, we are generating over 300 million tons of plastic waste. Now, this is not the amount of plastic that we're creating. This is just the amount of plastic that we're throwing away. So, the question is, where does all this waste come from? Who's creating it? And the answer is, I am. You are. Every one of us is contributing to this problem. Every time we buy or use a piece of single-use plastic and throw it away, whether we put it in the recycling bin or a garbage bin, or heaven forbid, we throw it out our car window or something, we are the problem, our society. We are the ones who are creating this mess. And I don't know about you, but when I was raising my kids, I taught them that if they had a mess, if they made a mess, they needed to clean it up. And so we're making this mess. It's our responsibility to clean it up. And we talk about our waste footprint. That is the idea of getting away with how much waste do I, as an individual, create? If you're a typical American, think about a cube that is 8 feet high, 8 feet wide, and 8 feet deep. Okay? That is the amount of plastic waste that average American creates every single year. And that's not just loose, plastic, big bottles and stuff taking up a lot of space. That's the crushed volume. You can see in this picture what that would look like. An 8 foot by 8 foot by 8 foot cube of plastic trash is what you are creating if you're an average American. So the next question is, where does all this waste go? As I said, according to the EPA, these are 2015 numbers. According to the EPA, only 9.1% of the plastic that goes into our municipal solid waste stream was recycled. So this is not the amount of plastic that, it's not 9% of the plastic that we created. It's not even 9% of the plastic that, that goes out, that we use. This is 9.1% of the plastic that actually makes it into the solid waste system. So this does not count all the plastic that people throw away on the beach or that blows out of their the back of their pickup truck after they've tossed it in there or something. This is the waste that actually makes it to the landfill or makes it to the solid waste facility. 9.1% of that plastic is recycled. Another 15.5% is combusted for energy. They're burning this plastic to generate energy, which of course is a significantly better thing to do with it than just throwing it away out into a landfill or an environment. But this is not a very clean source of energy. So there are problems with doing this too. Actually, burning plastic is actually a dirtier source of energy than burning coal. But still, at least we're using it. But 75.4%, so more than 3/4 of the plastic waste we generate goes into landfills. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing because at least in the landfill, it's sequestered. It's not going to add to carbon emissions and greenhouse gas issues. It's not going to go away once it's in the landfill. It's not going to end up in the oceans. But still, this is not the ideal situation. 75.4% of this waste is going into landfills. And again, that's only the waste that actually makes it into the waste control system. Now, here's part of the problem. Again, these numbers were all 2015 values. In 2016, China imported 2/3 of the world's plastic waste. This past year, the end of 2018, China just shut off that source or that import. They said that they are no longer going to take all the world's plastic trash. And now that really threw the solid waste industry into a bit of a tizzy. we now have all of this recycled, plastic that we're that we're collecting for recycling, but we have no place to send it. That has been, a real issue. So a lot of the plastics that are being collected that used to be shipped to China for recycling, those are just being put back in the landfill. Now, some of that slack is some extent we're shipping it to other countries like Vietnam and India. But for the most part, a lot of that plastic is just still going into the landfill, or it's ending up in our environment. This is a great graph by Jenny Jambeck from the 2015 data. And this shows what countries are producing the most plastic waste and what they're doing with it. Okay, if you look at the green squares for each of these countries, each green square that represents, those green squares represent the amount per capita of plastic waste that is generated in each of those countries. So you look down at the United States and you see that the United States generates a lot more plastic waste than pretty much any other country, more than twice as much as China or any of these other countries that we're talking about. But yet, look at the other column, the other colors, those yellow squares below the green ones. That's the amount of the plastic that's mismanaged. Okay, that's the amount that's just being thrown away out in the streets, or is just in the environment, that isn't being taken well care of. And you can see, compared to the rest of the world, the United States actually does pretty good. We're pretty good at managing our waste. And the little blue square, that's how much of the plastic we generate that ends up going into the ocean directly from the United States. Okay, it's still too much. We're still talking 2 pounds of plastic per person that's going into the waste and going into the ocean every year from the United States. But that's not nearly as bad as some of these other countries. And you look at China, for example. In China, they create less plastic waste than we do, but the majority of that plastic waste is mismanaged. It's not being handled properly. And look how much of their plastic waste is actually making its way into the ocean. Okay, that's a lot. Significantly more than what was coming directly from the United States. But think about this. Think about this. What are we doing with our plastic waste when we say we manage it well? What we mean by saying we manage it well is that we're shipping it off to China and Vietnam, well, mostly now to Vietnam and to some of these other countries. So we are taking our plastic waste and we're shipping it to countries that are not managing that plastic well. And so even though only a small amount of our plastic ends up in the oceans directly, we're sending it to places where a lot larger percentage of that plastic is going to make it into the oceans. So that's a problem right there. Right now we know, based on a lot of interesting studies in the last few years, that almost 8 million metric tons of plastic ends up in the world's oceans every year. 8 million metric tons a year is going into the oceans. And it's not going away, so it's building up. One scientific journal stated that approximately 5 trillion pieces of plastic, which weigh more than 250,000 metric tons, is currently afloat in the oceans. A lot of this gets concentrated by the currents. Probably many of you have heard of the Great Pacific Gyre. It's an area where the currents carry all of this floating plastic, and it gets concentrated into say a small area compared to the whole Pacific Ocean, but it's an area bigger than the state of Texas, where there's tons and tons of plastic trash that's getting concentrated. But you can drive through or sail through this part of the Pacific, and you might not actually see that much plastic floating, because a lot of it is below the surface and a lot of it is being broken down. As I said, plastic breaks down over time into what we call microplastics. And you know, these plastics that are out there in the ocean, they are killing a lot of our sea creatures. They are very, very hazardous. Creatures consider them, you know, they think that they're food and they try to eat them. They ingest them, and sometimes they die directly from that. They also can get tangled in plastic waste. You know, it's plastic nets or fishing lands or plastic bags. They can get tangled up in these things. They can suck them in. It can block their breathing. There are all sorts of ways that these plastics are hurting a lot of the sea life. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the plastics, you know, are not big enough to easily see because they've broken down into these small pieces. And that's the thing about plastic. It never really goes away. It just gets smaller. Okay. Now, microplastics specifically, you know, they're considered to be any piece of plastic that is less than 5 millimeters long is a microplastic. And there's some of them that are man-made purposely to be that size. You know, you have microfibers in clothing and in various fabrics and things. You have microbeads that are used in cosmetics and things like that. You have plastic pellets that are used for a lot of manufacturing purposes. So these are plastics that are created to be microplastics. However, practically any plastic that you send out into the ocean or into the environment in general, you know, it's eventually going to break apart into pieces, and it's going to end up being microplastics. So right now it's estimated that there are somewhere between 15 and 51 trillion individual pieces of microplastic in the world's oceans. Okay, that's a lot of plastic. If you go to any beach in the world on the ocean and you scoop up some sand and look at it under a microscope, you're going to find plastic, little pieces of plastic mixed in with the sand. And that's out there floating in the oceans of this world everywhere. So now we come to the answer to the big question. What can we do to make a difference? Okay, as I said, you know, who is responsible for this mess? We are. So who's responsible to make a difference, to change the thing? We are. You know, you and I can be the solution to this problem. Yes, it's important to, you know, to look at our legislative solutions, to look for our governments to try to solve this problem. You know, it's important for us to, you know, consider what big corporations are doing to help this problem and things like that. But really, the bottom line comes down to it is that you and I, when we reduce the amount of plastics that we use, that is the biggest thing that we can do to help this problem. So we all are familiar with the, you know, the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, and recycle. Okay. The problem is, I think that in our society that we have focused so much on the recycling part that we've kind of lost track of the other part. There are a lot of people I know who have the mindset that they're going to buy this bottled water, I'm going to drink it, but if I throw it in the recycling bin instead of in the trash can, then I'm doing my part. Well, as we've already seen, a majority of that plastic, even if you're throwing it in the recycling bin, a lot of it is still ending up in landfills. You know, a lot of stuff that's going to the landfills is even that. Some of it's not even making it to the landfills, especially things like plastic bags. As I've said, I've spent a lot of time at landfills. And one thing I can tell you is that plastic bags are the bane of any landfill operator because they're almost impossible to control. The wind catches them and they blow all over the place. You go to an active landfill and you'll see plastic bags everywhere. Plastic bags stuck into trees, stuck to fences, plastic bags in the drainage ditches or the stormwater ponds. You have plastic bags everywhere because they're very difficult to control. And so a lot of that plastic is ending up outside the landfill. It blows away out of the landfill property, gets into a creek, into a stream, which eventually flows down to a river, which flows to the ocean. And that's where a lot of our plastic is coming from. And it's not just plastic bags. I mean, even, you see a garbage truck going down the street, or particularly people who are taking their own trash to the dump. It's on the back of a pickup truck, or it's on the back of some open truck, and it bounces out or it blows out as they're driving along. Even some professional garbage haulers often have a lot of loss as they drive down the road. So this is a real issue. A lot of the stuff, even if you throw it in the recycling bin, it's not necessarily being recycled. So really, we need to move up this waste management hierarchy, and we need to be focusing on what we consider the most preferred way to deal with waste, and that is source reduction. We need to start focusing on reducing the amount of plastic that we use, and therefore the amount that we manufacture. So what can you do? What can I do to reduce my waste footprint? I think the real focus has got to be on buying and using less single-use plastic. That is the single most important any one of us as an individual can do. And there are a lot of things we can do. Here are just a few of the suggestions. We can use a reusable water bottle instead of buying plastic bottled water. Okay, that's one thing we can use. We can use a real coffee mug at the office instead of taking a styrofoam cup. We can refuse plastic straws and plastic utensils at restaurants. Here's something that I carry with me in my car. I have this little packet. I've got a bamboo spoon and fork and chopsticks and this metal straw. So if I go into a fast food restaurant, if I'm out in the field and I need a lunch, I don't have to use the plastic that they offer at the restaurant. I can bring my own, and I can then wash them when I get home. That's a great way to reduce how much plastic waste I create. Other things that I can do is, I also carry this nice collapsible cup with me in my car. That's a nice way. I don't have to use plastic cup when I go to a restaurant. I don't have to use plastic bags either. I can go to the grocery store and I can take a cloth bag that's reusable to get all of my groceries. I can, even around the house, instead of using plastic Ziploc bags, I can use cloth bags, that I can put our leftover food and things in and stick them in the refrigerator. Or I really like these silicone bags that you can use. You reuse these things over and over again, and they're great. But we can even, even just reusing the plastic we have. If I bought some flatbread that, that comes in a nice plastic bag, it's even got a Ziploc top. Instead of throwing this away, I can rinse it out and reuse it. And I put my sandwich in it when I'm going to work or whatever. I could use this 3, 4, 5 times before it's so worn that I have to throw it away. And that definitely is a good way to reduce the amount of plastic that we're using. Another thing we can do that I really recommend is buying in bulk. Instead using larger quantities of products. Usually, if you buy a larger quantity, the percent of packaging per the amount of product that you're buying is less. It often even costs less, so there's a benefit there too. You can buy concentrated products, like buying a little can of frozen juice instead of a big bottle of juice. You can also use concentrated cleaners. Here at Shackley, we are, one of our favorite products is our Basic H. A little bottle like this, is enough to make the equivalent of thousands of bottles of regular cleaner. So therefore it keeps all those extra bottles out of the landfills and out of our environment. We can also choose to to buy products that are not packaged in plastic. You know, I remember when I was a kid, we always got our milk in glass bottles that we then sent back to the dairy for them to reuse. They'd clean and reuse them. Well, you can still do that. There are a lot of stores that sell, particularly this is a local dairy that we use, but you can buy the milk in glass bottles, and the glass bottles then go back to the dairy and are reused. That's a great way to reduce our amount of plastic waste we're using. Even when you're shopping, just being aware of the issues. You know, if I go to the grocery store and I want some spinach, for example, I could go to the shelf that has all the nice boxes, plastic boxes full of spinach, or I can go over to the produce section and just buy a bunch of spinach that doesn't come in a plastic box. You know, that's a much better choice in terms of the environment and, you know, reducing my waste footprint. So there are a lot of things that we can do, you know, as citizens. You know, there are also things we can do to, you know, reusing things is definitely, you know, significant part of reducing the amount of plastic waste that we create. You know, I can use reusable glass water bottle, you know, instead of metal or plastic. I can use a real cup, as I've said before. I can use the reusable metal straw instead of a plastic one at the store, at the restaurant. You know, I can use reusable cloth grocery bags, as I've mentioned before. I can go to thrift stores and buy things at thrift stores that other people would throw away. And that is a lot more cost effective, and it keeps some of those things out of the trash. Similarly, if I have things that I'm done with that I no longer need, if I can take them to a thrift store and let somebody else have a chance to use them instead of throwing them away, that's going to reduce the amount of waste that I'm generating. And just sharing things with neighbors, you know, also reusing things or being creative. You know, we've got a great facility here that, you know, will take all sorts of plastic containers and glass containers and all sorts of things that people normally throw away, and that they will make them available for people, you know, to reuse. They might use them for crafts, or, you know, schools may use them for school projects. There are all sorts of things that can be used, that can be reused, that we don't have to throw away. And so really what it comes down to is it's every little choice that you or I make makes a difference. We got in this mess one piece of plastic at a time, and that's the way we're going to get out of this mess. It's our responsibility. And it's every single choice we make, all the little choices of, you know, whether I'm going to use a disposable plastic bottle or a reusable one. Things like that. Or I'm going to use a reusable grocery bag, or I'm going to take the plastic bag from the grocery store. These are all choices that we make, and every little choice makes a difference in the big picture. Shaklee is a company that has really been committed to being a part of the solution. As I mentioned before, you know, one of our great products is this Basic H, which comes with some nice plastic spray bottles. One bottle of this can save at least, you know, thousands, depending on what kind of products you're using it for. If you're using it for window cleaner, it's like 5,000 bottles of window cleaner out of this one container. That's a great savings at all that plastic that's being kept out of our landfills. And the cleaner itself is safe for the environment. It's safe for you and for me, for our health. It's a great product. You know, similarly, you know, we have our great Shaklee water filter. This is an incredibly effective water filter that really is more efficient than almost any other filter on the market in terms of removing contaminants. So if you're concerned about your tap water, instead of getting bottled water, just filter your water and put it in a reusable bottle. And that way you're keeping thousands of plastic water bottles out of our landfills and out of our environment. These are all things that you and I can do very easily to be a part of the solution. So I want to wrap this up with one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite authors, Aldo Leopold, who's considered one of the fathers of American environmental movement in the 70s. He wrote a wonderful book called The Sand County Almanac. In that he said, I have read many definitions of what is a conservationist, and I've written not a few myself, but I suspect that the best ones are written with a pen, not with a pen, but with an axe. It is a matter of what a man thinks about while chopping or while deciding what to chop. A conservationist is one who is humbly aware that with each stroke, he is writing his signature on the face of the land. Signatures, of course, differ whether written with axe or with pen, and this is as it should be. Right. This, I think, is a crucial part of what we do. See, this is it's a matter of what we think about. It's a matter of being aware of what every little decision we make, what the impact is in the bigger picture, and how we're impacting our environment. I personally believe that God put us here on this planet, in part, to be stewards over this beautiful earth, and we've done a lousy job of it. So I'm just calling you all, and myself too, to a higher standard of being a part of the solution instead of a part of the problem. Thank you very much.